Great. There is 14 people already online, so maybe we'll kick off. We have 26 people who registered for the event, so there will probably be more people joining in the first minutes. My name is Jan Feller. I'm acting managing director of the German-Finnish Chamber of Commerce, and I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to you for what is our fourth FinDe webinar today, or this year. It's our fifth FinDe seminar, and it's our 10th webinar this spring, which is something which we obviously did not plan in the beginning, but we found out that the webinars have become obviously a very light way for our members to be there. We have attendances or attendance rates that are much higher than for the physical FinDe seminars, which traditionally had between, let's say, 8 and 15 participants. So the concept of the FinDe seminar and the FinDe webinar as well is that one of our member companies shares their knowledge with others. We have 650 member companies. They are all professionals in their specific area, and I'm super happy that we have a very warm and vivid community, actually, where members are ready to share their knowledge with others as well. One of those members is Taival and Michael Hanf, who is CEO and co-founder, right? And Michael is a German living in Finland and has a long experience in working with businesses of various sizes. He is super enthusiastic about circular economy and about AI and about the digital aspect of it. He also is nowadays a member of the advisory board of the German-Finnish Chamber of Commerce. And we have asked Michael to join us for this FinDe webinar to share his insights on a very important topic that has been a bit in the background this spring due to the coronavirus situation, but nevertheless is maybe the most important challenge for companies in this world. Circular or sustainable development in a way, circular economy, and fighting the climate change are the biggest challenges that humankind is facing right now. So thank you very much, Michael, for coming here and sharing your knowledge. And the floor is yours for the next hour. Questions for the attendants can be asked in the chat. The chat box is on your right-hand side. If it's not open yet, then just click on the small red rectangle with 3 white buttons, and it will open there. We'll follow the questions during the session. We have our team from our communications department here. It's the logo AHK Finland. That's the guys. They will also flag questions. And Michael, if you could from time to time have a look at the chat box. Floor is yours.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Jan. I'm really excited, really happy to be here today. Really looking forward to introduce the topic of sustainability and circular economy to you, and hopefully have an active discussion and active interchange. Sustainability, circular economy is a topic that's close to my heart, as Jan already pointed out, but is also close to Taival, and I will talk a little bit more about that. Before we start, Jan already pointed out that the chat is to your right. Could I ask you to actually try the chat out and type there from where are you joining, and maybe what your interest is in the topic of sustainability and circular economy. So just go over to the chat and type in where are you joining from, or where are you from, and what your interest is in the topic. I will continue talking while you do that. I'll come back to that in a moment. We will also be using polls today. I think they will also then, when we open them up, they'll pop up on the right-hand side of your window, just to get a little bit better understanding. As we're not together face-to-face, it's sometimes a little bit difficult to understand what people are interested in and where they're coming from. So we will be using the polls for that today. So before we start, maybe a couple of words about Taival and myself. So Taival is basically, I would say, an advisory company, a strategy advisory company, a new one focusing on strategy, design, data, and circular economy. What does that mean? 3 years ago, we basically came together with the co-founders of Taival, and we realized that the way strategy was done, the way companies were working, was not really reflecting what was demanded out there in the world from a strategic level, but also from an execution level. And that's where we started Taival, basically with the ambition of changing how companies address strategic game changers like circular economy, like data. And we've now basically been bringing together 12 seasoned professionals out of these areas to work together with our clients hand in hand in a co-creation mode in solving some of these problems. Very much aligned with the theme of the German-Finnish Chamber of Commerce. We have an office in Berlin, as well as here in Espoo, where our main office is. So we live the bridge between Germany and Finland on a day-to-day basis. But that's maybe enough about Taival. I'm originally, as Jan said, from Germany. I've been living here in Finland for 16 years, used to work for a company called Accenture that some of you might know. But since now 3.5 years, been the CEO of Taival and been working there with many customers across the topics that I mentioned. Okay, enough talk about Taival and about myself. Let's get to the topic. Circular economy and sustainability. And I will open up the first poll here. And basically, I would ask you to rate your understanding of circular economy. So how would you rate your understanding of circular economy and sustainability? If you could jump to the right-hand side and quickly answer the poll, that would give me a little bit of an understanding of where to focus and how much knowledge you all have on the topic, so that I don't go into the basics if we have all experts in the room, or don't assume that you're experts if we have people in the room that only have a basic understanding or no understanding whatsoever. So great if you could jump over to the poll. In the meantime, how did we come up with the focus on circular economy and sustainability? Jan alluded a little bit to it. We basically see at the moment a couple of major important movements in the world. We see climate change, but very acute at the moment. We see what's going on in the US and in the rest of the world around equality, racism, and other major topics, and sustainability. With the Sustainability Development Goals put in place by the United Nations and circular economy in specific, we're addressing some of these problems that are currently bugging our world and making life hard for us, but also for future generations. And we believe that these two topics will be strategic game changers for companies of all sizes in all geographies going forward. And I will talk a little bit about that in a moment. And that's the reason why we have taken this up in Taival with our clients, and why we're working on that topic quite extensively over the past 3.5 years. Looking at the poll, we have a good mix of people that have a good understanding, moderate understanding, and limited understanding. So I will try to find a balance between explaining some of the basics, but maybe not going too much into the details there. You're always able to reach out to me if you want to hear more. It's basically first name dot last name at taival.com. So michael.hanf@taival.com if you want to discuss further also after this session. So what is circular economy and sustainability? Sustainability, basically, simply put, is a concept of how we interact as companies, as individuals, with each other, with our environment, and how we conduct our business or our day-to-day life. It includes topics like equality, as I mentioned. It includes topics like environmental impact. It includes topics around fair treatment, for example, in developing countries or in other parts of the world. And circular economy is basically a subset of that looks at specifically the way we interact with our environment when it comes to products and services, and how we basically keep materials, resources in circulation. There's a very nice example. I think it was a couple of years ago when a research found out that we have already produced 10 times the plastic that we will ever use on this planet. And I think that is a very good indication that we have in the past been very much overusing the resources that we have. And you can basically see that in the World Overshoot Day, which is, I don't want to say celebrated, but which is marked on an annual basis, which basically states at what point of the year we've actually been using the resources that should actually carry us through the year. And unfortunately, and very shockingly, that day basically moves closer and closer to the beginning of the year as we're consuming more and more resources in an ever faster pace. So moving forward, we see that what we call a disruptive storm is forming. So we see four things happening that will impact companies now, but even more in the future. On one hand, the customer demand is shifting. We see specifically the younger generation, but basically people of all ages and all social backgrounds paying more and more attention that their products are sustainable, that they're basically produced in an environmentally but also socially impactful way. And that in combination with digital is basically providing a significant shift in the way consumers consume, demand, as well as buy their products. At the same time, we see the regulator taking a very strong stand. And over the past months, despite the COVID crisis, we've actually heard a lot about the Green Deal from the EU level, or the Green Recovery. So what that means at the end of the day is that a lot of the recovery money that will be put into the economy will basically be given based on green principles, on environmentally, on sustainable principles. So if we're looking what that means for companies, it means that money investments coming from the regulator will basically look at these criteria. And if I have a product that's still stuck in a linear world and is basically ruining the environment, that will minimize my chances of actually getting support from the regulator. At the same time, and I will talk about that a little bit in a moment, the regulator is pushing for new regulation. You see the Plastics Directive, you see many other regulation, specifically at the moment around plastic, but also in other areas that will impact companies going forward significantly. But it's not only the regulator and the consumers that are looking at sustainability, it's also investors. And I had a very interesting discussion a couple of weeks ago with a colleague of mine where the colleague basically stated, listen, there was a lot of money pulled out of the markets as part of the COVID response. Where do you think investors will invest going forward? Will they go back to the old economy companies that are basically not paying attention to sustainability, circular economy, and these type of principles? Or will they basically use this change to invest into companies that are sustainable, invest into companies that follow circular economy principles? So also from the investment community, we will see a significant shift towards more sustainable metrics in their investment decisions. And finally, we have seen it already for a long time, new startups, new technology evolving. And we have an event series called Digitally Circular that we have been running for 2 years now. And there we have noticed a significant shift in the activity around sustainability and circular economy. And there's more and more young companies, startups, but also small and medium-sized enterprises that actually utilize sustainability and circular economy as a key differentiator in their offering, and basically develop completely new services that address sustainability and circular economy topics. So we believe that also from a competitive point of view, new competition will basically emerge and will change the competitive landscape. I talked a little bit about the regulatory environment. So there's a lot of regulation on the EU level currently being worked on. And you see basically from production and consumption through waste and resources to basically the basic economics, the financing, there will be regulation and there will be guidance coming from the EU. One thing that's very interesting, specifically when we talk about circular economy, we very often talk about recycling. So very often circular economy is equal to recycling, which is not true. So I will come to that in a moment. Circular economy is much broader than just recycling. So as a conclusion of this first part, there will be change. So there will be change in many very different areas, but that change will come. It will come through the four forces that I mentioned: the consumers, the regulators, the investors, and basically the competition, the changing competitive landscape. Let's maybe jump to the pull briefly. And I would like to ask you, is circular economy relevant for your company? Do you feel that the changes in the market that I just mentioned, do you see those within your companies, and how you see the importance of circular economy? So I'll give you a couple of minutes to answer that. Again, the poll is on the right, so if you could jump there and put in your answers, then we can have a look at those. While you're doing that, let me quickly talk about the concept of circular economy. I mentioned we very often talk about recycling when we talk about circular economy, but that's only a small portion, and it's basically only the last resort. So we should only use recycling if all other areas of circular economy basically fail. So the first thing we're looking at in circular economy is that we're looking at repairing, maintaining, and upgrading existing products. The iPhone is a very good example. I remember still back in the days when I got my first mobile phone, that was a Nokia. You could still replace the battery. You could still do a lot of things yourself by just opening it up and cleaning it or whatever. But then with the iPhone, it got so close, you can basically not replace anything anymore in that context, and that is actually bad from a life cycle point of view. I cannot extend the life cycle by repairing my device or by basically upgrading it as I move forward. On the software side, naturally there are upgrades, and with that I can extend the life cycle of my product. But the one of the directives that the EU has put in place is basically the right for repairability of products. So we now need to have products, consumer products, that are repairable. The second area is then reuse. So basically keeping products in circulation. There you basically have platforms like Tori or other platforms where used products can be sold. A good example of that is the good old-fashioned second-hand store that you go to, or the flea market, where products are kept in reuse. And there's more and more digital platforms basically coming up that are basically following that concept. And many companies are actually seeing and understanding that there is business value behind that. So Reima, for example, as an example in Finland, has basically established a model of kids clothing as a service, where basically these kids overalls are basically taken back and then reused basically in other, and they're basically sold through a platform called Emmi for secondhand clothing. The third area is remanufacturing. It's interesting. Many of the car manufacturers actually have been entering the space of remanufacturing very early on. And one car manufacturer actually stated a couple of years ago that the remanufacturing plant is one of the most profitable plants that they actually have in their portfolio of plants, where they basically take back products or cars, and then they refurbish them or they reuse parts for other purposes. And naturally, as a lot of the investments into the products have already been done, it's a high margin business at the end of the day. And then the last one is basically the recycling. But as I said, the key principle is basically to basically minimize waste when you're in the production, extend the value and the usage, and then consider the broader economic framework and the broader economic conditions. So these are the four loops that are basically driving circularity, and the value, as you can imagine, basically reduces the further you go down. Recycling is only the recycled material price, whereas repair, maintenance, and reuse can actually achieve a much higher price. Looking at the poll, it's good to see that 72% of you say that yes, circular economy is relevant for my company. 9% say no. I guess that's maybe due to the fact that different industries and different type of companies move in different phases towards circular economy, towards sustainability. And we see some early movers, and we will see some industries that will actually move later in that process. And specifically, service companies are currently trying to understand in more detail what circular economy actually means for them. 18% say, I don't know. I guess that's also one signal that we currently see a lot within companies, that circular economy is still a topic that a few in the organization are discussing, but it's not yet discussed in the broader context of the organization. Circular economy is very often a topic that is actually put into the hands of the chief sustainability officer, or sometimes it's in the hands of the marketing officer. But we believe that in order to be successful and really transform a company, you need to make sure that the whole organization is on board, and that you basically work even beyond the organizational boundaries, more in an ecosystem mode, as the topics of sustainability and circular economy very often expand beyond the boundaries of the company. So if you think, for example, about material flows. So if your company produces a product and you have side streams, waste basically out of your production, you need another company that can use that these side streams, that waste, basically as an input for their production. And that is basically the reason why circular economy and sustainability are topics that consider or needs to take into consideration an ecosystem thinking. When we think about the journey, we very often see that it starts with an interest, sometimes on the C-level, sometimes within the organization. And then the next step after that is to basically build awareness among the key stakeholders within the organization in order to actually get momentum in moving into this direction. And then you basically go into the cycle of planning, then executing that plan, motivating people to basically be on board, and then measuring that impact and basically going through that cycle continuously. one of the key things that we see is to really make sure you have on board different people in your organization. So the planning is fantastic, and we have been working with a lot of organizations that have put circular economy and sustainability into their strategy, but then have failed to basically roll it out into their organization. And sometimes when I'm in discussions, be it with the chief strategy officer or be it with the CEO, I basically get the question, we now have circular economy in our strategy, but how do I basically explain to the people on the ground that basically do the day-to-day operational work in our organization, how they should implement that? What does this actually mean for them? And there it's very important to motivate people, to enable people, to educate people. Not everyone needs to be an expert, and there's different levels of maturity that different people in the organization should be having. So, for example, the leadership team should actually have a quite good understanding of what circular economy, what sustainability is in order to lead the charge. But then the rest of the organization needs to be at least enabled to understand what it means for them on a day-to-day basis, and how they basically embed that into their day-to-day activities. I mentioned that it's basically a team sport. It's not the chief sustainability officer. It's not one single person in the organization that can drive circularity, but it's basically, it needs involvement across the organization. It needs to be embedded in the strategy, setting strategic targets, setting strategic objectives for the organization. And then from there, it needs to go through different layers, from product and services, where design is one of the most critical elements when we think about products. 80% of the waste is actually put into the products in the design stage. And very often these mistakes or these design decisions, if you want, are not cannot be changed later on in the process, because they have basically been taken into consideration in production planning, in all of these things. And you need to build an ecosystem around the products and services. I mentioned REMA. So the model for REMA only works because they have a partnership with SME that then basically do the secondhand selling of their products. In many other areas, you have a similar setup, and we did a project recently for Smart and Clean, the sustainable development organization of the city of Helsinki, or the capital region here in Finland. And we created a plastics ecosystem operating model and data model, which made us realize how complex the relationships are between different players in the ecosystem, and how important it is for every player in that ecosystem to understand their role and to understand how they can actually contribute, but also benefit from this. The second area is the operations. Naturally, if you have a large factory, you need to take circularity, sustainability into consideration, both in your supply chain, in your logistics. If you buy raw materials from Africa or from Asia, you need to make sure, or you have your production there, you need to make sure that your products or your materials are produced in a sustainable fashion, and that also their circular economy principles are taken into consideration. And finally, business models. I mentioned that many organizations we're working with are basically discovering that circular economy, circular business models, as well as sustainability, can basically create a key differentiator for them. They're basically either expanding existing business models, with that create stickiness for their customers, so basically keep the churn down of customers, or basically create completely new business models. For example, as a service business models, there's currently a big shift towards as a service business models. That is also demand from the younger generation of consumers, which basically means that you don't buy a product anymore, but you rent the product, or you basically get it as a service. and you basically return it when you don't need it anymore in that. And that provides a very good possibility to open up completely new customer segments that you might not have been able to address previously. And then finally, it needs to be a cornerstone of your operating model. So the other day, I discussed that with a customer, and what we concluded is that circular economy and sustainability are as much about operational implementation as it is about mindset. So back to the point I made earlier, you need to educate your people, your organization, and enable them to understand what is the benefit for themselves as well as for your organization in basically implementing these principles. Shortly on that point, there is different areas, and this is a slide that was put together by Citra and by Gemia Theolisus. There are different focus areas or value areas that can be taken out of sustainability and circular business models. On one hand, as I mentioned, is revenue generation, increased sales, improved market access, but also extending the product portfolio. On the other side, you have cost savings. If you basically can resell your waste, you're basically reducing your cost of production. Another thing going forward, there will very likely be cost for CO2 emissions, as well as for other waste streams. So if you imagine that your competitor manages to reduce their CO2, so they don't need to pay CO2 offsetting costs, but you are basically still paying those costs, that is a significant cost disadvantage that you basically have there compared to your competition that will directly translate into pricing disadvantages for your organization. And you see the example of Neste here pointed out. Brand enhancement, as I said, consumers are paying more and more attention to what they're buying. So it naturally also is a brand reputation type of play that you have here. And it's a lot about also employer branding. People want to work for companies that are responsible and that are doing the right thing. So in order to be able to attract the best talent, it's also an important element. And then risk reduction. I spoke earlier about the regulator doing a lot of things. So compliance and basically being able to look at these forthcoming regulations and be able that you are able to comply with them is naturally reducing the risk that you have on your balance sheet quite significantly going forward. We are currently developing a maturity model, a circular economy maturity model that goes through different stages, and that will basically the idea is to put that into a simple tool so that companies can actually measure their own maturity and basically create an action plan out of that. From level 0, basically there's no interest in our organization and we haven't even been looking into what it means for us, to level 5, where we're really proactive. We develop our ecosystem, we develop new products, we develop new services. Our operations are completely aligned with CE principles. Let's maybe jump to the poll a little bit, just to check that all of you are still awake and you haven't dozed off with me talking so much. How would you rate the maturity of your company in circular economy? Is it low? Is it medium? Is it high? I didn't use the levels you see on the screen here, but try to simplify it a little bit. What's the maturity of your organization when it comes to circular economy? Are you already offering circular economy services, and are you doing a lot in that space, or are you in the early stages of implementing circular economy? So if you go to the polls on the right hand side and basically answer that question, then I'll revert back to that in a moment. So what we looked at is how can you jumpstart your journey towards circular economy, and what are the things that you could actually be doing in order to make sure that you progress along that transformation journey that I shared with you some time ago. So in the interest and awareness stage, circular economy trainings, workshops with employees as well as the wider ecosystem are critical. But we've also been running awareness campaigns where we basically use gamified trainings and micro-learning to basically educate the leadership team, but also the broader organization with these topics. Then in the planning, motivate, and enable stage, very often we start with either a circular design study, a circular economy strategy or roadmap, which is basically setting the stage for the organization to understand how could these topics actually be taken forward, which then translates into operational and organizational reviews, or operating model and ecosystem model development. And then finally, in the act and implement, there we were very often looking at supporting the circular economy transformation journey, but also then develop concrete business models and prototypes and really piloting. One very critical thing in this last stage, in the act and impact stage, is really the measurement. So to put up a KPI model or an OKR model or whatever model you're using, in order to really follow up that the activities that you basically are planning in the earlier stages are really taken on in the organization, so that you can basically feed that back into the next loop of planning. Looking at the poll, there's 50% with low maturity, 37% with medium, and 12% with high. I think it's a reflection that this is a topic that's getting traction, that's gaining traction in organizations, and it's something that we're actually moving forward with only now. As I mentioned, we have had the Digitally Circular event that focuses on digital solutions for circular economy now for 2.5 years. And we've seen a tremendous shift during these 2.5 years. Early on, it was primarily sustainability and circular economy experts that would actually join the community event. Nowadays, it's shifting much more to a very equal mix between research, startups, representatives from large companies, as well as experts. And I think that is reflected also in the poll here, that we basically see organizations starting to be interested, starting to understand what it actually means, and getting on board this circular economy and sustainability wave that we will see happening, or the disruptive storm, as I called it earlier. One deep dive, maybe a little bit. The circular design is, as I mentioned, at the heart of many of the problems that we have today. Design is the starting point for many products and services. And if in the design stage we're not considering circular design principles, it's almost impossible to basically catch up later on in the life cycle. So what that means is that once you've basically designed a product as it is, be it a car, be it a mobile phone, or be it kitchen equipment, once it's out there, once it's being used either in the B2B space or in the B2C space, and you haven't designed for longevity, repairability, maintainability, and all of these things, you have no chance of going back and redesigning a product that's already in use. So it's extremely critical to actually make sure that during the design phase, you actually take that into consideration. And as mentioned earlier, 80% of the impact, of the environmental impact, and 90% of the manufacturing cost is actually resulting from decisions made during the design phase. So that is something that the first time I saw this, the first time I heard that, I was quite shocked how big the impact is. It's not surprising, but I think it's something that we don't necessarily always relate to, that the design is so critical. So we're currently working with quite a few companies around understanding circular design and understanding how they can embed circular design and sustainability principles into their R&D, into their product and service development, so that they make sure that they don't need to play catch up later on once they are in production or once their products are already in use. The journey again that we see there for companies is to basically start with understanding where you are today. Basically discover, have a look at your R&D practices, look at trends and forecasting. We are using a lot of foresight or futurist kind of thinking in our approach, as the pure numbers strategy work and work in this space very often is done backwards looking at the numbers of the past years. We're trying to change that into more forward-looking approach. So when you do this first phase of understanding where you are and what the market brings, try to look forward a couple of years and try to understand what the market will bring and what will be the opportunities of the future. Don't only look at the opportunities of today. If you, for example, think about big video rental companies that we had all over the world, where you basically walked in and they would actually have your video cassettes that you could take home. If they would have anticipated the shift towards streaming, online streaming, they most likely would have made different decisions. But as they were focusing on today, they didn't anticipate that future direction. Then define, look at the circular design principles, the innovation areas that you need to focus on, and then develop these. So make sure you develop the right capabilities. Make sure you take these these principles into action, and develop these products and service concepts that are basically taking that into consideration. And then back to what I said earlier, make sure you continuously drive that change throughout the organization, as we're basically seeing a lot of developments and changes in that area, and we will see even more of that going forward. Before going to the Q&A, I would ask you for a last poll. And that is basically asking you if your company is basically looking to start any circular economy or sustainability initiatives. If you know about those, naturally. And what is the time horizon you're looking at? Is it immediately that you're starting those? Do you have no plans at all? Or is it in 6, 12, or even longer time frame that you're basically planning to take these initiatives and basically take actions in the area of circular economy and sustainability? So I'll give you a minute to answer that question. I'll take a sip from my coffee and then start looking at the chat for questions, and then we can come back to the polls result later. I don't think there are any questions at the moment. So if you're done with the polls and you have any questions, please feel free to type that into the chat, and then we can address those, either specific questions or then questions to the topics that I have been discussing. There's no questions. So either I was so clear or so unclear in what I presented. So that's the difficulty of the digital format. You don't see people, so I cannot see if you actually did fall asleep, if you were shaking your head in disagreement, or if you were nodding in agreement. So that's always a little bit tricky in these webinar sessions. We should actually start having sessions with a video on both sides. So that also the speakers can actually see how the audience is reacting. Okay, so I guess we have the pulse in. I think the bars are not moving anymore. So there's 28% where no actions are planned, maybe in the initial interest and awareness stage before actually. Then 42 that are in the planning phase. Then 14 that are planning to take action in the next 6 months, and 14% that plan to take action in the next 12 months. So I think it's a very good mix, and it might reflect actually what we discussed earlier, what you see on this current slide, that you will go from we don't have a plan, but we need to understand what it means for us, to, okay, we have a plan for the next 6 or 12 months to basically take action and really get into this mode of taking things forward. So really, really interesting. So let's move to the chat. There was a question about success stories of companies. I think there are actually quite a few success stories of companies that have been doing this successfully. I think there's Goodyear actually started to do a model where they're actually now selling tires on a kilometer basis, so on an as a service basis. They're selling tires on an as a service basis. You see examples like Bremer that I mentioned that are actually shifting into a model where the kids' overalls, you don't buy those anymore, but you basically buy those as a service, which naturally give Bremer the possibility to always send you new overalls once the new edition comes out, or once the new model comes out, and basically take back the old model. So they basically tie you in for a significantly longer time period. There's also new business models. Only yesterday, we did some garden work here with the neighbors, and I basically learned that Bauhaus is now renting out building equipment. So for them, that's a whole new business model and whole new revenue model of basically providing tools as a service, which is heavily linked to basically the sharing part or the reuse part of the circular economy, but which basically caters for completely new business models. On the other side, you see more and more companies basically go into the repairability mode, and with that become more interesting for customers if they can actually upgrade their products in that way. So there's a very long list of success stories, and there's actually Citra has been putting together a web page with some of the success stories that are out there, both on the startup but as well on the established company side. Then a question: if you compare the situation of companies with this topic in Germany and in Finland, how do you see that? That's a very interesting question. It's a very good question. I think there's not major differences in that. I think Germany was very early on when it comes to grüner Punkt and the recycling side of things. So I think there's a lot of move, or they were very early on in moving there. And then there's a very high degree, for example, when it comes to bottle returns or returning cans, empty cans. Finland, on the other side, was the first country that actually created a circular economy, a countrywide circular economy roadmap, and is now actioning that with very concrete examples. There's, for example, now a material marketplace that Motiva, one of our customers, is working with to make sure that companies of all sizes and all industries can basically share their waste with companies that potentially could use that in their production. I think the area of circular economy and sustainability is so wide that it's very difficult to compare the countries. I think one advantage Finland has is that Finland is a country that's very mature when it comes to digital technology, and it's a very environmentally connected country. So, and you have a lot of good clean tech technology. So I think there's a huge potential for Finland as a small country to play a significant role in this area of specifically digital circular economy and sustainability solutions. Germany, on the other hand, naturally has a huge market and has a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises that drive innovation and drive new solutions that Germany very specifically can build on in order to further develop and drive these solutions and bring them to the market. So from that point of view, I think both countries have done good things. Can do more. And I think the green recovery that the EU is pushing at the moment is going exactly into that direction to basically support different countries, different companies, different cities in that development, also with monetary incentives. Marcus is asking how common it is, in your opinion, that companies rather using sustainability, circular economy initiatives as an opportunistic marketing tool and not to seriously achieve a sustainable transformation. I think that's an excellent question, Marcus. I think what I strongly believe is that we will see something very similar to what we've seen in the digital space. So digital very early on was basically something that was going on all over the organization. Everyone was doing, the marketing department was doing a little bit of digital, the operations department, the supply chain department. And at some point in time, the CEO or someone else noticed, like, that's not the way we should approach that. We cannot just experiment everywhere without bringing that together and linking it back to our strategic targets. And then there was the CIO, who was basically, I mean, he was doing something with tech. So why wouldn't that person take on the digital responsibilities? But there was a major difference in the focus. The CIO was basically focused on providing IT solutions at a significantly lower cost point, whereas the CDO was looking at creating new revenue models, creating new business models, and really also was mandated to do things across the organization. And something similar we will most likely see in the circular economy and sustainability space, where we very often today have chief sustainability officers, which are unfortunately very often in the marketing department or part of the CFO organization or part of the reporting organization. And that's basically where some people in organizations will notice that that's not the way to go, that sustainability, exactly as you said, Marcus, is not a marketing tool, but it's much, much deeper. It's something that actually decides about the survival of the company. If you consider that the EU at some point in time might decide that only companies that operate on sustainable, on circular economy principles will allow to be entering the European market, then you can see that this can be quite existential. And then we will either see that the chief sustainability officer will be empowered, or there will be a new chief circular economy officer, whatever the name will be, who will then be able to also go to different people in the organization. Because as I mentioned earlier, it will impact the whole organization. You will need to look at your supply chain. You will need to look at your R&D. You need to look at your logistics. And you need to have a person in the organization that can actually go to these guys and say, dear Mr. Chief Supply Chain Officer, you need to change the way we operate. We need to change, we do logistics. And unless that person or that group or that organization is empowered to do that, it will very often, unfortunately, fall back to this marketing tool or more towards something that the greenwashing type of thing that we're seeing. Good. I see first people are leaving, and there's no further questions. So I would like to thank all of you for joining today. It was a pleasure to talk about this topic to you. And unfortunately, there's a limitation to talk about the topic with you. But I hope that you will reach out either via LinkedIn or via email or phone. Give me a call or drop me an email or connect on LinkedIn. Also, please feel free to follow Taival on LinkedIn. We're publishing a lot of thought leadership items and event announcements through our LinkedIn stream. So please go over, follow us there to stay up to date what we're doing in that space. And then looking forward to hopefully talk with you face to face and meet you in one of the future FinDe seminars when we actually get a chance to do that face to face again. I see a question about sharing the presentation. Björn, yes, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to share the presentation with you then afterwards. That's not a problem at all. Perfect. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great day, and looking forward to talk with you in the future. Enjoy the summer. Thank you. Bye-bye.